The world's most famous architectural mistake stands 186 feet tall in the Italian city of Pisa, defying gravity and logic for over 800 years. What millions of tourists see as charming was actually a construction disaster. So catastrophic, it nearly caused the entire project to be abandoned 3 separate times. The Leaning Tower of Pisa wasn't supposed to lean, not even slightly. When construction began in 1173, the architects planned a perfectly vertical bell tower, one that would rival any structure in medieval Europe. Instead, they created the world's most expensive mistake, a building that has been slowly falling over for 8 centuries and somehow became more famous for its failure than most structures are for their success. The lean began almost immediately. By the time workers had completed just the 3rd floor, the tower was already visibly tilting. But here's where the story becomes truly incredible. Instead of abandoning the project, medieval engineers did something that would be considered insane by modern standards. They kept building. For over 200 years, they continued adding floors to a tower that was clearly doomed. Most remarkably, the tower came within hours of being demolished, not by structural failure, but by American soldiers during World War II. In 1944, US Army engineers had already placed explosives at the base when a retreat order came through. Had that order been delayed by even a few hours, the world's most famous architectural failure would have become a pile of rubble. The tower that was never supposed to lean has survived earthquakes, wars, and 8 centuries of impossible physics. It stands today as humanity's most beloved architectural rebel, forever leaning, forever defying expectations, forever proving that the most perfect buildings are sometimes those that are perfectly imperfect. Welcome back to the Sleepy Structures, where we explore the world's most magnificent buildings through the gentle lens of history, one story at a time. Tonight, we journey to medieval Italy, to a city that once ruled the Mediterranean seas and commissioned a bell tower so ambitious that it nearly bankrupted the Republic, a tower whose construction spanned 2 centuries, survived wars, earthquakes, and the rise and fall of empires, all while slowly tilting toward what should have been inevitable collapse. This is the story of humanity's most beautiful mistake, the Leaning Tower of Pisa, a tale of medieval ambition, engineering disasters, stubborn pride, and the strange way that failure can sometimes become more celebrated than success. So settle in, dim the lights, and let us return to that fateful day in 1173 when the citizens of Pisa began building what they hoped would be the most perfect bell tower in Christendom. But how did this beautiful disaster come to be? What drove the people of medieval Pisa to attempt such an ambitious project? And why did they continue building, even as their tower slowly tilted on toward catastrophe? To understand the Leaning Tower, we must first understand the remarkable maritime republic that created it, a city so wealthy and powerful that it believed it could defy the very laws of physics. In 1173, when construction of the tower began, Pisa was not the quiet university town that tourists visit today. It was one of the 4 great maritime republics of medieval Italy, commanding fleets that controlled trade routes across the Mediterranean, and amassing wealth that rivaled Venice and Genoa. The Pisa that decided to build this audacious bell tower was a superpower, drunk on its own success. Pisan merchants had established trading posts from Constantinople to North Africa, bringing exotic goods, new technologies, and enormous profits back to their home city. The harbour buzzed with activity as ships arrived loaded with silk from Byzantium, spices from the east, and silver from Islamic lands. Pisan coins were accepted currency from London to Jerusalem, and Pisan warships protected Christian pilgrims travelling to the Holy Land. This maritime empire generated unprecedented wealth that transformed Pisa into one of Europe's most magnificent cities. The Piazza dei Miracoli, the Field of Miracles, where the tower stands today, was conceived as a statement of Pisan power and divine favour. The cathedral, baptistry, and bell tower were designed as an integrated complex that would proclaim Pisa's supremacy to every visitor who entered the city. The timing of the tower's construction was no coincidence. In 1063, Pisan fleets had achieved a spectacular victory over Muslim forces at Palermo, Sicily, capturing enormous quantities of treasure and taking thousands of prisoners. The cathedral was built with funds from this victory, and the tower was intended as its crowning glory. A structure so tall and magnificent that it would be visible to ships entering Pisa's harbour from miles out at sea. Medieval Italian cities competed fiercely for prestige, and bell towers were the ultimate status symbols. Venice had St. Mark's Campanile. Florence was planning its cathedral dome, and Milan boasted the tallest spires in northern Italy. Pisa, not to be outdone, commissioned a freestanding bell tower that would surpass them all, in height, beauty, and acoustic perfection. The designer, whose identity remains disputed, but was possibly Bonanno Pisano, created plans for a cylindrical tower of unprecedented elegance. 8 stories of arcaded galleries would rise in perfect proportion, each level slightly smaller than the one below, creating a graceful tapering effect. The walls would be built of gleaming white and grey marble with decorative elements that echoed the cathedral's Romanesque style. The acoustic design was particularly sophisticated. The tower's hollow interior and carefully calculated proportions were intended to amplify and project the sound of the bells across the entire city and surrounding countryside. The upper floors would house 7 bronze bells, each tuned to a different note, capable of creating complex harmonic sequences that would announce religious festivals, call citizens to assembly, and warn of approaching enemies. Construction began with great ceremony in August 1173. Archbishop Dagobert blessed the foundation stone, while city officials and wealthy merchants competed to make generous donations to the project. The finest stonemasons in Italy were recruited, along with specialists in bronze casting, marble carving, and architectural engineering. No expense was spared in pursuit of perfection. The Pisans believed they were creating more than just a bell tower. They were building a monument to their civilization's achievements. The tower would stand as proof that Christian engineering could surpass anything created by the Islamic world or the ancient Romans. It would demonstrate Pisan mastery of mathematics, acoustics, and architectural proportion, while serving practical functions for centuries to come. The project represented the confidence of a city at the height of its power. Pisa controlled trade routes, worth millions of gold florins annually, commanded naval fleets that could project power across the Mediterranean, and had accumulated artistic and intellectual treasures from across the known world. Building the world's most ambitious bell tower seemed not just possible, but inevitable, for a republic that had conquered the seas. But beneath this supreme confidence lay a geological nightmare that would transform Pisa's greatest triumph into its most famous disaster. Modern soil analysis has revealed the full extent of the geological nightmare that medieval builders unknowingly confronted when they chose the site for their bell tower. The ground beneath the Leaning Tower consists of 3 distinct layers, each presenting its own structural challenges, creating a foundation disaster that was virtually inevitable from the moment construction began. The top layer, extending down about 35 feet, consists of soft clay mixed with fine sand and organic matter. This unstable mixture, deposited by the Arno River over millennia, has a consistency similar to thick mud and possesses almost no load-bearing capacity. Beneath this lies a layer of marine clay, slightly more stable, but still wholly inadequate for supporting a structure, weighing over 16,000 tons. The third layer, composed of dense sand and clay, doesn't begin until nearly 130 feet as below the surface, far deeper than any medieval foundation could reach. What makes this geological situation even more treacherous is that the ground conditions vary significantly across the tower's footprint. The south side, where the lean developed, sits above a particularly soft pocket of clay and organic deposits. The north side rests on slightly firmer ground, creating the uneven settling that initiated the tower's famous tilt. Medieval builders had no way to detect these subsurface variations, lacking both the technology and the geological knowledge to assess foundation conditions properly. The chosen location made these problems worse. The tower site sits in what was once a tidal lagoon, gradually filled in by river sediments and human activity over centuries. The Romans had built structures in Pisa, but they were typically low, wide buildings that distributed their weight over large areas. The Pisans' decision to construct a tall, narrow tower with a relatively small footprint concentrated enormous weight on the most unstable ground in the region. Archaeological evidence suggests that medieval builders were aware of ground instability from the earliest stages of construction. Excavations have revealed that they attempted to compensate for soft soil by creating a foundation slightly wider than originally planned, extending it to about 60 feet in diameter. They also increased the foundation depth from the standard 6 feet to nearly 10 feet, using large stones and high-quality mortar in an attempt to create a stable base. These measures proved inadequate almost immediately. As the massive stone walls began to rise, the soft clay beneath the foundation started to compress and deform. The process was gradual, but relentless. Each new course of marble added hundreds of tons to the total weight, forcing more water out of the clay and causing further settling. The uneven nature of this process created differential settling that manifested as the tower's characteristic lean. The foundation's failure became apparent during the construction of the third floor. Workers noticed that courses of stone that had been laid perfectly level were becoming visibly tilted as the tower settled unevenly. Mortar joints that should have been uniform showed gaps on one side and compression on the other. The tower was literally twisting as it sank into the soft ground. By 1178, when the first construction phase halted, the tower had already tilted approximately 0.2 degrees toward the south. While this might seem minimal, it represented a significant structural problem for a building that was intended to rise much higher. The builders faced a dilemma: continue construction and risk catastrophic failure, or abandon the project and lose the enormous investment already made. The decision to halt construction for nearly a century was probably the only thing that saved the tower from collapse. During this extended pause, the soft ground beneath the foundation underwent a process called consolidation, the gradual expulsion of water from clay under sustained pressure. This process stabilized the foundation somewhat, though it also increased the lean as the differential settling continued. The most remarkable aspect of the foundation disaster is how it actually contributed to the tower's survival over the centuries. The soft ground that caused the initial problems also provided unexpected benefits during earthquakes. When seismic waves reached Pisa, the flexible clay beneath the tower absorbed much of the energy that would have damaged a structure built on solid rock. The tower swayed during earthquakes, but rarely suffered significant damage. Ironically, several attempts over the centuries to fix the foundation made the lean worse. In 1838, architect Alessandro della Gherardesca ordered excavation around the tower's base to expose the foundation and create a walkway for tourists. This excavation removed soil that had been providing lateral support, causing an immediate increase in the lean rate. The well-intentioned improvement destabilized the tower more than 500 years of natural settling. Core samples taken during the 20th century revealed that the clay beneath the tower was still slowly deforming under the enormous weight. Unlike normal soil consolidation, which should have stabilized after centuries, the ground beneath the tower showed signs of ongoing creep, a continuous deformation that would never reach equilibrium. This discovery explained why the tower's lean continued to increase throughout its history. The foundation disaster that began in 1173 created a structural challenge that would perplex engineers for 8 centuries. The tower stood balanced on the edge of collapse, held up by a combination of medieval engineering, geological luck, and the strange physics of tilted structures. It became a living laboratory for studying the relationship between architecture and geology, proving that even the worst foundation problems can sometimes create accidental masterpieces. Despite these foundation problems, medieval stubbornness and engineering ingenuity would drive the construction forward across 2 centuries, creating a building process unlike any other in architectural history. The construction of the Leaning Tower spanned an extraordinary 199 years, from 1173 to 1372, making it one of the longest building projects in medieval Europe. This extended timeline wasn't planned. It resulted from a combination of structural problems, political upheavals, financial crises, and the sheer stubbornness of Pisan engineers who refused to abandon their increasingly precarious project. The first construction phase, lasting from 1173 to 1178, established both the tower's beauty and its fatal flaw. Master builder Bonanno Pisano created the first 3 floors with exquisite craftsmanship. Each level featured blind arcades with delicate columns and capitals, creating a rhythm of light and shadow that made the tower appear to float despite its massive weight. The marble came from quarries near Pisa, selected for its pure white colour and fine grain that allowed for intricate carving. But as the 3rd floor neared completion, the lean became impossible to ignore. Medieval builders lacked modern measuring instruments, but they could see that the tower was no longer vertical. Stone blocks that should have aligned perfectly showed visible gaps on one side, and plumb lines dropped from the upper floors clearly missed their marks at ground level. The first construction halt in 1178 wasn't entirely due to the lean. Pisa faced military threats from rival cities Florence and Lucca, forcing resources to be diverted to defence. The Battle of Meloria in 1284 devastated the Pisan fleet and marked the beginning of the Republic's decline from Mediterranean superpower to regional city-state. The incomplete tower stood abandoned for 94 years, slowly settling into its tilted position while Pisa struggled with political and economic crises. When construction resumed in 1272 under Giovanni di Simone, the challenges had multiplied. The lean had increased during the long pause, and the foundation showed signs of continued settling. Di Simone faced an unprecedented engineering problem: how to continue building on a structure that was already unstable and becoming more so with each passing year. His solution was revolutionary for its time. Rather than attempting to correct the lean directly, Di Simone decided to build upward while compensating for the tilt. He carefully measured the exact angle of the existing structure and calculated how to make each new floor slightly taller on the south side, creating a gentle curve that would partially offset the lean's visual impact. This approach required extraordinary precision. Each stone had to be cut to slightly different dimensions, with the south side blocks consistently taller than their north side counterparts. The mathematical calculations involved, performed without modern instruments, were remarkably sophisticated. Di Simone essentially invented a form of architectural calculus, determining the precise curvature needed to create visual balance despite structural instability. The second construction phase added floors 4 through 7, each more challenging than the last. As the tower grew taller, the lean became more pronounced at the top, requiring increasingly dramatic compensation in the stone cutting. The weight of each new floor also exacerbated the foundation problems, causing continued settling that threatened to accelerate the lean beyond controllable limits. Work proceeded slowly, with frequent interruptions, for political and financial reasons. The tower's construction had become enormously expensive, requiring specialized craftsmen and custom-cut stones that couldn't be produced quickly or cheaply. Pisa's declining economic fortunes made funding increasingly difficult, leading to construction delays that sometimes lasted for years. The most challenging aspect of the second phase was installing the bells. 7 bronze bells, each weighing several tons, had to be lifted to the tower's upper floors and mounted in a framework that could withstand both their weight and the vibrations they would create when rung. The bells were cast by the finest bronze workers in Italy, tuned to create harmonic sequences and decorated with religious inscriptions and Pisan symbols. Lifting the bells presented enormous logistical challenges. Medieval crane technology could handle heavy loads, but the tower's lean complicated every operation. Ropes and pulleys had to be positioned to account for the tilt, and workers had to calculate load distributions that prevented the bells from shifting the tower's centre of gravity beyond the foundation's capacity to support it. The installation process revealed just how precarious the tower had become. When the largest bell was being positioned, the tower visibly swayed under the load, causing workers to flee in terror. The operation was completed successfully, but it demonstrated that the structure was operating at the very limits of stability. Construction finally halted again in 1284, with only the bell chamber remaining to be completed. The devastating naval defeat at Meloria had bankrupted Pisa and killed many of the skilled craftsmen working on the tower. The partially completed structure stood for another 88 years, its bells silent and its future uncertain. The final construction phase began in 1372 under Tommaso Pisano, who faced the delicate task of completing the bell chamber without triggering a collapse. The tower's lean had continued to increase during the second interruption, and adding any significant weight to the top floors posed serious risks. Pisano's solution was to make the final floor as light as possible while maintaining its structural integrity and acoustic properties. The completed tower reached a height of 186 feet, with walls that varied in thickness from 13 feet at the base to just over 6 feet at the top. The total weight approached 16,000 tons, all resting on a foundation that had been inadequate from the beginning. The lean at completion measured approximately 1.4 degrees, enough to make the top of the tower overhang its base by about 4.5 feet. Despite its obvious structural problems, the completed tower was acknowledged as an architectural masterpiece. The graceful proportions, exquisite stonework, and ingenious compensation for the lean created a building that was beautiful, precisely because of its imperfection. The slight curve introduced by De Simone's compensatory building technique gave the tower a sense of movement and life that a perfectly straight structure could never achieve. The 2-century construction process had created something unprecedented in architectural history, a building that was simultaneously a disaster and a triumph, a failure that had become a success through sheer persistence and ingenuity. As the tower neared completion, it would soon become associated with one of history's most famous scientists. Though separating fact from legend in the story of Galileo and the Leaning Tower requires careful examination. The image is iconic. Galileo Galilei climbing the spiral staircase of the Leaning Tower with objects of different weights, preparing to conduct the experiment that would revolutionize our understanding of gravity. According to legend, he dropped the objects simultaneously from the tower's top, proving that all bodies fall at the same rate, regardless of their mass. The story is compelling, historically significant, and almost certainly false, yet it reveals deeper truths about both the scientist and his famous hometown landmark. Galileo was indeed born in Pisa in 1564 and spent his early career at the University of Pisa, where he held the chair of mathematics from 1589 to 1592. The Leaning Tower dominated the city's skyline throughout his youth and would have been a familiar sight during his daily walks through the streets. As a young professor, Challenging Aristotelian physics, Galileo needed dramatic demonstrations to support his revolutionary theories about motion and gravity. The legend first appeared in a biography written by Galileo's student Vincenzo Viviani, published years after the great scientist's death. According to Viviani, Galileo demonstrated this by repeated experiments made from the height of the Leaning Tower of Pisa in the presence of other professors and all the students. The account describes professors and students gathering in the piazza to witness objects of different weights hitting the ground simultaneously. However, careful examination of Galileo's own writings reveals no mention of this dramatic public demonstration. His notebooks and published works describe thought experiments and laboratory studies, but never reference dropping objects from the Leaning Tower. Galileo's approach to scientific investigation emphasized controlled conditions and repeatable measurements, qualities that would be impossible to achieve in a public demonstration from a 186-foot tower. What Galileo did prove about falling objects was based on more sophisticated experiments conducted on inclined planes in his laboratory. By rolling balls down carefully constructed ramps, he could slow down the effects of gravity enough to make precise measurements of acceleration and velocity. These controlled experiments provided the mathematical foundation for his laws of motion. Yet the legend persists because it captures essential truths about Galileo's scientific method and his relationship with the tower. Even if he never conducted the famous dropping experiment, Galileo certainly used the tower for other scientific observations. The tower's precise lean angle made it an excellent reference point for studying trajectories, angles, and geometric relationships. Galileo's mathematical training would have made him acutely aware of the tower's structural problems and the engineering principles involved in its construction. His notebooks contain calculations about the center of gravity and the relationship between an object's height and stability, concepts directly relevant to understanding why the tower leans but doesn't fall. More importantly, the tower served as inspiration for Galileo's broader scientific philosophy. Here was a structure that defied conventional expectations, that challenged accepted wisdom about stability and balance, that forced observers to question their assumptions about the physical world. The tower embodied the same spirit of inquiry that drove Galileo's revolutionary approach to science. The tower also provided a living laboratory for studying the effects of time on physical structures. Galileo would have observed how the lean continued to increase during his lifetime, providing real-world evidence of the ongoing effects of gravity and structural stress. The tower's gradual movement offered lessons about acceleration, equilibrium, and the relationship between forces and motion. Whether or not Galileo ever dropped objects from the Leaning Tower, his scientific legacy became forever intertwined with the structure that defined his hometown skyline. Both the man and the monument represented the same revolutionary spirit, the willingness to challenge established authority, to test ideas against physical reality, and to find beauty in imperfection. As centuries passed, after Galileo's time, the tower's lean continued to worsen, creating new challenges that would eventually threaten its very survival. For 7 centuries and after its completion, the Leaning Tower of Pisa continued its slow-motion fall toward Earth, tilting an additional fraction of a degree away each century as the soft ground beneath its foundation continued to compress and deform. Medieval records from 1350 showed a tilt of approximately 1.4 degrees. By 1450, the lean had increased to 1.6 degrees. By 1817, it had reached 5.1 degrees, and the tower was visibly moving, year by year. The most dramatic increase occurred during the 19th century, when well-intentioned restoration efforts inadvertently accelerated the disaster. In 1838, architect Alessandro della Gherardesca ordered excavation around the tower's base to expose the original foundation and create an attractive walkway for tourists. The excavation removed soil that had been providing crucial lateral support, causing the lean to jump from 1.9 degrees to 2.1 degrees within just a few years. By 1900, the lean had reached 2.3 degrees, and sophisticated measuring equipment revealed that the tower was tilting southward at approximately 0.05 millimeters per year. This rate would gradually accelerate throughout the 20th century, reaching 1.2 millimeters annually by 1990, a 24-fold increase that suggested the tower was approaching the limits of structural possibility. But the tower's greatest existential threat came not from gradual tilting, but from the chaos of World War II. On August 31st, 1944, Staff Sergeant Leon Weckstein of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers stood at the base of the Leaning Tower with demolition charges in his hands and orders to destroy what military intelligence considered a German observation post. The liberation of Pisa had begun as Allied forces pushed German troops northward through Tuscany. The Leaning Tower presented obvious military value to occupying forces. Its height provided commanding views across the Arno River Valley toward Allied positions. Allied intelligence reports identified the tower as an active enemy position, though the evidence was largely circumstantial. Weckstein had participated in similar operations throughout the Italian campaign, destroying bridges, towers, and fortified positions to deny strategic assets to retreating German forces. The Leaning Tower represented just another target on a long list of military objectives. The demolition plan called for explosive charges at the tower's base, creating structural failure that would cause the entire building to collapse. But as Weckstein examined the tower more closely, he began to have doubts. The structure showed no obvious signs of recent military occupation, no radio equipment, no defensive modifications, no evidence of German presence. The tower appeared to be exactly what it seemed, an ancient architectural monument with no strategic value. Weckstein's hesitation proved crucial, just as he was preparing to proceed with the demolition. Captain William Perry arrived with updated orders from divisional headquarters. German resistance in Pisa was collapsing faster than expected, and demolition operations should be suspended, pending assessment of captured structures for intelligence value. The timing was extraordinary. Had Perry's message been delayed by even an hour, Weckstein would have proceeded with the planned demolition. The explosives were already in place, and the detonation sequence duster was prepared. Within minutes more, the Leaning Tower would have become a pile of marble rubble in a bomb crater. Instead, Weckstein's team conducted a thorough search of the tower, climbing the spiral staircase and examining each floor for signs of German occupation. They found dust, cobwebs, and centuries of accumulated debris, but no evidence of recent military use. The search confirmed that German forces had considered using the tower, but rejected it as impractical for precision artillery spotting. The close call became known only years later when Weckstein, by then a successful architect in civilian life, began speaking publicly about his wartime experiences. His decision to question orders and delay the demolition had saved one of the world's most recognizable architectural monuments from destruction during humanity's most destructive conflict. The incident highlighted the broader challenges of protecting cultural heritage during warfare. The Leaning Tower's survival represented a rare victory for heritage protection in the midst of total war, dependent on a single soldier's judgment call made under combat conditions with incomplete information. Having survived the immediate threat of wartime destruction, the tower would face its final crisis in the late 20th century as the lean approached the point of no return. By 1990, the Leaning Tower of Pisa was dying. After 817 years of gradual tilting, the world's most famous architectural accident had reached 5.5 degrees of lean, just half a degree away from the calculated point of no return, where collapse would become inevitable. Italian authorities faced an unprecedented challenge: how to save a structure that had been slowly falling for 8 centuries while preserving the very imperfection that made it famous. The Italian government assembled an international commission of the world's leading structural engineers, soil mechanics experts, and historical preservation specialists. The Commission for the Safeguarding of the Tower of Pisa included representatives from 14 countries and faced an almost impossible challenge: stabilize the tower without changing its appearance, halt centuries of tilting without altering the lean that made the structure famous. The breakthrough came from soil mechanics rather than structural engineering. Professor Michel Jamilkowski proposed a technique called soil extraction, carefully removing small amounts of earth from beneath the north side of the tower's foundation. This would cause the north side to settle slightly, gradually reducing the lean without requiring any visible modifications to the structure itself. Implementation required extraordinary precision. Engineers working beneath the tower removed just a few litres of soil per week, monitoring the structure's response with sensors that could detect movements, measured in fractions of millimetres. The tower began to respond almost immediately, tilting back toward vertical by tiny amounts that were barely measurable, but structurally significant. The restoration project took 11 years and cost over €30 million. By 2001, the tower's lean had been reduced from 5.5 degrees to 3.97 degrees, essentially returning it to its 1838 condition. More importantly, the soil extraction had stabilized the foundation, reducing the annual tilt rate from 1.2 millimeters to effectively 0. Today, the Leaning Tower of Pisa stands as humanity's most beloved architectural failure, attracting over 5 million visitors annually. The tower exists in a carefully maintained state of controlled instability, leaning enough to create visual drama while remaining stable enough to ensure safety. Sophisticated monitoring systems track every aspect of the tower's condition with precision that would astound its medieval builders. Over 200 sensors embedded throughout the structure continuously measure temperature, humidity, stress loads, and microscopic movements. This comprehensive monitoring has revealed that the tower undergoes predictable thermal cycles, leaning slightly more during hot afternoons as marble expansion affects its geometry, then recovering partially during cool nights. Tourism management has become an art form, requiring constant balance between access and preservation. Visitors must book timed entries weeks in advance, with group sizes limited to 45 people and climb duration restricted just to 30 minutes. This controlled access ensures maximum numbers of people can experience the unique thrill of climbing a leaning building while preventing dangerous overloading. The restoration's success has transformed Pisa from a declining provincial city into one of Italy's premier tourist destinations. The tower generates over €200 million annually in direct tourism revenue, supporting thousands of jobs and funding extensive conservation programs throughout the city. The structure that nearly bankrupted medieval Pisa now provides the economic foundation for modern Pisa's prosperity. Climbing the tower remains an extraordinary experience. The spiral staircase, worn smooth by centuries of footsteps, follows the tower's curve as it rises through 8 levels of arcaded galleries. The lean becomes increasingly apparent with each floor, creating a disorienting sensation that connects modern visitors directly to 8 centuries of continuous history. The 7 medieval bells continue to function, though their use is carefully regulated as to prevent structural stress. The sound of bells, echoing from the Leaning Tower, creates an acoustic experience just that bridges past and present, connecting visitors to the original purpose of this remarkable structure. Contemporary preservation specialists continue to monitor the tower's condition and develop new techniques for heritage protection. Climate change poses new challenges, with rising temperatures, increasing thermal stress cycles, and changing precipitation patterns affecting soil moisture around the foundation. Advanced materials and monitoring systems ensure the tower can remain stable for at least 200 more years. The tower's influence extends far beyond tourism and preservation. It has become a universal symbol of triumph over adversity, representing the idea that imperfection can be more compelling than perfection. The tower inspires contemporary architects, educates millions of students annually, and serves as a model for international cooperation in cultural preservation. As evening falls over the Piazza dei Miracoli and floodlights illuminate the tower's marble facade, visitors gather to witness one of architecture's most poetic sights. The structure that began as medieval Pisa's proudest achievement became its most embarrassing failure, and evolved into its greatest treasure, continues its eternal lean against the Tuscan sky. The Leaning Tower of Pisa endures as proof that the most magnificent human achievements sometimes emerge from our most spectacular failures. In its stubborn refusal to stand straight, it has taught 8 centuries of visitors that perfection is overrated, that persistence can overcome the worst mistakes, and that sometimes the most beautiful buildings are those that dare to defy the very laws of physics that should govern them. Tonight, as stars appear above Tuscany, and the tower begins another night of its centuries-long dance with gravity, it stands as humanity's most beloved architectural rebel, forever leaning, forever defying expectations, forever proving that the most perfect buildings are sometimes those that are perfectly imperfect.